Hello and welcome to Daytime, your place for scary stories, straight from the horror forums of Reddit. Make sure to like and subscribe for more horror tales of things that go bumping the night. On tonight's episode, a man stuck in a traffic jam decides it's a good idea to grab an iPad when he's in a sudden car crash. So, always pay attention to the road, because the coma really changed me.
Last year, I was in an accident. There was a traffic jam and I was stuck for 20 minutes. I decided it was a good time to bring out my iPad, so I took off my seatbelt and leaned into the back seat to get it from my gym bag. Seconds later, a car rear-ended me at 65 miles per hour. I smashed my head into the dashboard so hard that it was like turning off a light. It took 13 hours of surgery, 5 weeks in a coma, and 8 months of physical therapy to get me back on my feet. On paper, that's the end of the story. But there's more to tell. I brought something back from the coma. It is so hard to describe my experience. You completely lose track of time, so a passing thought can take an instant or an afternoon. There is no way to tell. You can be completely aware of everything that happens around you, and yet you can't recall anything anyone has said. You can become hyper-focused on a smell in a particular part of the room, but don't feel a single thing when someone gives you a shot or stretches your legs. It is like floating in an empty black room with twinkling stars of cohesive thought floating just out of reach. I could have been alone for mere minutes or weeks before I finally met him. There is no way to tell. But there was someone there to keep me company. There, in the void. I first heard him as a distant voice, calling out to me. There was something inside me, telling me to keep my mouth shut, but I just couldn't. I was scared and alone. I answered the call. The first time I saw him in my mind's eye, he was tall, probably about a head taller than me. He was thin, hairless, and completely nude. He seemed tired. We could barely understand each other, as if we spoke different languages. Still, he stayed with me, occupying my thoughts. After a while, we started to sound alike. We started having conversations, we started making jokes, telling stories, getting to know each other. Again, it could have been minutes, it could have been weeks, and I don't remember anything about it. There was just the sensation of having him there, of having company in the nothingness. Still, a few of his words stood out. "I'm nobody," he said once. "In so many ways, I'm nobody. And sometimes, you are too." So that's what I called him, the nobody. As time passed, I realized I'd made a mistake. As my body struggled to wake up, the nobody tried his best to keep me around for just a little longer. He wanted a friend and companion in the dark, someone to get to know and share his experiences with. I don't remember what he told me, but I remember how it made me feel. It made me feel dread and existential terror, like there was something I desperately wanted to forget, something I wish I didn't know. Luckily, I don't remember it, thank God. But the nobody wanted me to know. He kept telling me these awful things, as if to make me sympathetic to his state of being. He wanted me to give up and just stay there with him. But I wouldn't budge. I was determined to wake up and put this entire thing behind me, for however many years I had left to live. He got frustrated, and with every frustration he changed his form. His fingers would grow longer, his arms thinner. His head would grow pale and elongated, his mouth rounder like a leech. On the good days, he'd look like himself. On the bad days, I had to hide, listening to him, trying to sense my thoughts in the dark. But the day came when I could finally feel my body again. The stars in that empty void were turning into suns, and blotches of thought were connecting. A finger connected to a hand, connected to an arm. Eyes twisting and turning, trying to blink. In the final moments of my coma, I struggled so hard that my entire being was screaming the effort into the void. I'd either wake up or stay there forever. All or nothing. At first, I was failing, falling deeper into the void. Then a surge, the nobody, lifted me up and carried me into the light of thought. I woke up. Those 5 weeks just seemed like a murky memory. an afterthought. Something I've left behind, but not quite forgotten. I still have certain memories left, clear as day, but none of them as vivid as that of the nobody. If I had artistic talent, I could paint him from memory. I could spot him in a crowd of 100 people. I could have heard a single word in a crowded room, and I'd recognize his voice. To me, he was at the front of my memory. Still is. During my physical therapy, I brought it up with my nurse. She didn't laugh at me, but didn't take it very seriously either. People have all kinds of experiences, she argued. Some come back speaking different languages or thinking they're someone else. To you, it was all real. But here in the real world, it is not. You are you. And there is no one else. Try to find comfort in that. Of course, I tried, but I couldn't. It started with sleepwalking. Not much and not far, but enough to make me worried. I live alone, and waking up standing in the middle of a cold shower is not something I'd ever recommend. Or waking up with your mouth full of olives, choking on a kernel. I just figured it was a result of my brain damage. I told my doctor about it, but they didn't pay too much attention. They were more worried about signs of fatigue and dizziness. Still, my memory of the nobody was so vivid, I could imagine myself seeing him. I often got the feeling that he was right behind me if I just turned around quick enough. I'd enter a dark room, knowing he was there, making me afraid to turn on the lights. I would stare at an empty space, knowing that he would appear if I wasn't vigilant enough. I expected him at every turn, at every corner. He was real, but I also knew that there was no way he could be. Then there was an incident. It wasn't bad, but it looked bad. I was at a coffee shop ordering a latte and a bun when I suddenly fainted. Bang, lights out. I don't have any memory of what happened, but people in the coffee shop had freaked out. The ambulance came, 2 people were propping my head up with their jackets. They checked my pulse and breathing, and I was fine. I was just, lights out. The tests were inconclusive. Sure, there were some inconsistencies, but none of them were out of the ordinary. I'd been in a coma for weeks and only just recently started my physical therapy. There was sure to be readings that were out of the ordinary. So I got back home with a fairly decent bill of health. There was only one thing that bothered me. They'd gotten my height wrong. I'm a solid 5'9", but according to the tests, I was at least 6 feet 1. I'd also lost no less than 12 pounds since my last checkup. At first I thought it was in my head. My fingers were starting to look longer. I was losing a bit of my complexion. I made excuses for all of it. I never go outside, I'd say. It's just the weight loss making me look taller. But it wasn't that simple. The next few nights proved that. The sleepwalking got worse. The final straw was waking up in front of the bathroom mirror with the words, "Nobody loves you," written in blood. I'd shaved my head and brushed my teeth so violently, my mouth tasted raw flesh. I wasn't even pale anymore, I was pallid. Of course, the nobody loves me. I was his only friend in that place between worlds. That hollow, dark place. Over the upcoming weeks, the changes would become more obvious. I'd grow another 2 inches and lose another 20 pounds. My hair didn't grow back, and I lost hair in other places as well. I was having trouble with my teeth, and I was getting these violent coughs. My rib cage was aching from the coughing, and I got a prescription for asthma medication. It didn't help. I barely recognized myself in the mirror anymore. I started to look like him. Sometimes I'd hear him, just as I fell asleep. That bump in the night had a voice, thanking me for bringing him along. In the next breath, he'd praise himself for saving me. "Nobody helped you," the voice would say. "Nobody got you here." 6 months into my physical therapy, I was barely recognizable. A thin membrane had grown in my throat, effectively separating my voice into 2 pipes. One light, one dark, which spoke simultaneously. The doctor had a fancy word for it, and we tried to schedule surgery for it, but my insurance wouldn't cover it. It was the kind of condition one does not simply get, but something you just have. Hence, I couldn't have gotten it as a result of the accident. It had to be pre-existing, even though it wasn't. They said the same about my fingers. Fingers don't just grow. I could literally show the growth measure from day to day, but it didn't matter. My canines also grew longer. They'd poke a hole in my bottom lip at night. Not that I'd sleep much anyway. I was always tired. I'd dread going to sleep, so I started relying on sleeping pills. At best, I'd have a dreamless night that lasted 4 hours or less. At worst, I'd be twisting and turning in a cold sweat for 14 hours straight. Night and day float together when you live that kind of life. And sometimes, he'd come visit me, the nobody. I'd feel his presence lying there next to me, sometimes thanking me, sometimes praising himself. Except now, we had the same voice, the same double-piped voice, making us sound like two people speaking at once in a gruesome vibrato. Twin. One night, as I brushed my teeth, I saw him in the mirror. I could feel my face twisting and turning at his whim. We were having a conversation, wide awake, through my body. He smiling at me, through a face I barely recognized as my own. "I'll stop," he made me say. "I want you to be comfortable." "Leave me alone," I'd say in a different tone. "Just leave me." "No," I laughed. "We're out. We're free. Just listen to me, and it will all be fine." It was the second time I should have ignored him. The second time he called out to me. But I was too tired. I listened. At first, his demands seemed reasonable. He had different dietary restrictions, different things he liked. As long as I kept him happy, he allowed me to sleep, and my changes didn't progress. My canines even shrunk a bit. It was small things like drinking milk instead of water, eating ham instead of cheese, going to bed at the break of dawn instead of sunset. Little things, but they added up fast. Soon, he didn't even have to ask me to do it. I'd just do it. Then, it got worse. He'd want me to take long midnight walks, to stay inside during the day, to turn off the lights and put bed covers over the windows, to eat a raw chicken breast, to eat charcoal, to eat cockroaches, flies and worms, to sleep in an ice-filled tub, curled up in a ball. Step by step, I did it all. I barely even noticed the changes. I was growing isolated from friends and family who barely recognized me. I'd grown a third windpipe, and there'd be bones poking out from the side of my ribcage. My yawns would reveal a mouth twice the size of what I used to have. I tried going back to the doctor, but I heard the nobody scream in the back of my head. I'd just gotten off the bus when I stopped. "I'll bite your tongue off. I'll chew it. Swallow it. You'll taste your own stomach acid if you don't turn back home." I listened. I tried not to, but I did. I'm writing this because I don't know where this will end. My physical therapy came to an abrupt end. I can't go back to work. I can't go to my family. He doesn't allow it. Instead, he's giving me strange instructions. Addresses I've never been to. Names of people I've never met. He's having me read articles about distant places, about events that happen to other people. Not even big news or anything, just very specific things. An apartment fire in Minnesota, for example. Who cares? And that's the weirdest thing. I care. I really honestly care. I'm excited to do these things, to adapt. I feel stronger and more connected to myself with every submission. I like the taste of the things I eat. I sleep better in the places he makes me stay. And yet, I know that isn't me. Not the real me. This, right here. This is the real me. These words might be the last part of what it means to actually be me. I don't want to lose myself completely, but I know better than to torture myself against an inevitable conclusion. The nobody whispered truths about what we are and what we mean for weeks. He told me the way things really are and what it means to be human. And honestly, I'm not a fan.
Hello and welcome to Daytime, your place for scary stories, straight from the horror forums of Reddit. Make sure to like and subscribe for more horror tales of things that go bump in the night. On tonight's episode, a man and his wife starts to try for a family when they are gifted a strange sunflower. So what's a memorable gift you've received? Because we received the sad sunflower.
A few months ago, my wife Julie and I decided to start trying for a family. We moved out of the big city to a small Midwestern Minnesota town, not too far from Grove City. It was time for a change. Hell, we even decided to stop smoking. We found a cheap, recently renovated flat. The entire complex was built in the 50s, but the apartments themselves had been fixed up just recently. We were told by the landlord, an absolutely stunning young woman, that most of the previous tenants decided to move out rather than wait for renovations to finish up. The place was basically brand new. Our apartment was on the ground floor. We didn't want to think about baby-proofing a balcony on the 3rd or 4th floor, and we figured this would only be a stepping stone to getting our own house. Anyway, Julie had left her job as a high school teacher behind, while I'd gotten a job as manager at a local warehouse. I'd already worked as a manager previously for the same company, so it was just a matter of finding a suitable transfer. The previous tenants had left us a gift. Sitting alone in the kitchen window was a blue sunflower. At first I thought it was plastic, but it was perfectly real. The color was striking. It was still yellow in the middle, with black spots. But the leaves were a sparkling ocean blue. The flower pot was hand-painted with a small landscape and a shining sun. In plain black text it said, "The Sad Sunflower." "That is just too cute," smiled Julie. "We've got to keep it." I've never been able to say no to her. That big smile of hers could make me do anything. If she wanted to keep the sad sunflower, so be it. I watered it and turned it facing outwards. Oddly enough, it had been leaning inwards towards the apartment. I thought sunflowers were supposed to follow the sun. Julie just loved it. She already had a good feeling about this place. I wasn't convinced yet, but I figured it was just nicotine withdrawal. Over the following days, I was getting adjusted to my job. I brought in a cake to get to know everyone. Their previous manager had personal issues and suddenly left town, so there was urgent need for someone to step in. It was just great timing for me. Julie was still looking for a new job. There were a few schools nearby that she was going to look up, but we needed a second car first. Money was tight after the move, so we decided to wait a few weeks before making any big purchases. So Julie spent most of her days at home. She'd been clear about wanting to be a stay-at-home mom once we had a family of our own. So maybe she was just trying to get used to the idea. Call it a practice run. She would do a lot of housework and handle the groceries. I usually cooked dinner, but she would handle the dishes. One day after coming home from work, I noticed her humming a strange tune while watering the sad sunflower. I'd never heard it before. "You're my friend, I'll sing your tune, a setting sun to rising moon. I ask you, buddy, buddy blue, won't you be a sunflower too?" I took off my shoes and joined her in the kitchen. She'd hum the tune over and over, checking every leaf on that sparkling blue plant. It was leaning inwards again, away from the sun. Almost like a dog asking for a head scratch. "What's that song?" I asked. "What song?" I asked her several times over. She honestly didn't know what I was talking about. I read it out loud and she just blanked. The same way I could have sworn I heard her sing it, she swore she hadn't. I turned the plant back outwards, towards the sun. The next day, it was leaning back in. That tune started to haunt me. I could hear Julie sing it in the shower, while doing the dishes, while tying her shoes. Over time, she came to accept that she was singing it, but she wasn't doing it consciously. It was like a brain teaser. "I must have heard it somewhere," she said. Some kind of nursery rhyme. I couldn't blame her for having her mind occupied with kids' stuff. It was pretty much all we talked about. We just started trying for a baby, and it would just be a matter of time before our lives would change forever. It was stressful, but exciting. More of an adventure than any bungee jumping could ever replicate. Julie got a part-time teaching job at the local high school. One of their teachers were going on maternity leave, so they needed someone to step in and help out with social studies. We didn't have a second car, but one of the guys I worked with lived just down the street. So we started to carpool. I thought having some independence and getting out of the apartment would do Julie some good. It did at first. She had so much energy when she got home after a long day. Still, she would beeline towards her sad sunflower, take care of it, water it, and only then would she concentrate on anything else. She didn't even take her shoes off. That plant was by far her most favorite thing in the world. Honestly, I didn't get it. She still hummed that melody. "You're my friend, I'll sing your tune, a setting sun to rising moon." I once got back home early, only to notice that the sunflower was gone. Julie wasn't home from work, and the thing was just gone. Later, when Julie came home, it all made sense. She held that thing under her arm as she walked through the door. It was almost like someone holding a baby. She had a grocery bag swinging underneath. I'll be the first to admit I didn't handle it very well. "You're bringing it to work?" I accused. "What is going on with you?" "It's nothing." Julie sighed. It's like having a safety blanket. It doesn't mean anything." "Then throw it away." She stared at me in disbelief. I took a step forward to help her with her groceries, and she recoiled. Her eyes were dilated, and it looked like she was on the edge of a fight or flight reaction. I just stopped. "What the hell?" "Don't you dare," she spat. "Don't you dare." After that, Julie slept on the couch for a couple of nights. It was her idea, not mine. She would give me these long, accusing looks from across the room whenever I was in line of sight of that damn plant. It was still facing inwards. I'm sure the damn thing was moving or turning back every time I tried to face it outwards. I started hearing things at night. I once peeked out of the bedroom to see Julie water and prune that plant in the middle of the night. She'd sing to it over and over, the same rhyme. In the moonlight, it looked like she didn't even blink. 2:30 in the morning, and there she was caressing the leaves. There were other things as well. Foul-smelling dirt in the wastebasket. Dark blue sunflower seeds scattered around the bathroom. I didn't know what to make of it, but Julie and I weren't really talking anymore. She had no problem talking to that plant, though. "I ask you, Buddy Blue, won't you be a sunflower too?" It all came to a boiling point the day when Julie didn't come home from work. Of course, she'd taken the plant with her. I tried her phone, but she didn't pick up. At 7 in the evening, I was getting seriously worried. I called the school where she worked, but of course it was closed. Instead, I called her coworker, Miss Marriott. "This is Claire," she answered. "Hey, I'm calling about Julie. This is her husband," I said. "Sorry about calling you like this." "No, it's fine. Is everything all right?" "When Julie came to work, did she seem okay? Did she do anything unusual?" "I'm not following." "Well, like, did she bring—" "No, I'm sorry, I meant—" "What do you mean with came to work?" Apparently, Julie had quit her temp job about a week ago. I rushed down the street to my coworker and asked to borrow their car. They didn't mind, and even asked if there was anything they could do to help. I didn't even know where to start, so I just thanked them and left. I drove around town for hours, checking every open store, every alley, every side road. Finally, I stopped for gas. As I went inside to pay and get a soda, I noticed the clerk humming a tune. She was reading a magazine and humming away, barely noticing I was even there. I'd recognize that melody anywhere. "Where'd you hear that?" I asked. She just looked up at me like she'd woken up from a nap. She had no idea what I was talking about. I just paid and left, figuring Julie had been there. She was close. There was a small dirt road not too far from the gas station, leading down to a fishing lake. All you could catch there was smallmouth bass, but it was a great little place to have a barbecue. I drove down the road, following a hunch. It paid off. Just a few minutes later, I saw our car on the side of the road. The door was still open. Lights were blinking. It was swarming with mosquitoes. I parked alongside it and brought out a flashlight. There was a small trail through the woods, leading up to a clearing next to the lake. It was the only place she could have gone, unless she was just mindlessly going random directions. I didn't have to go far to hear her. There was no wind, so even a slight noise could be heard from far away. "I ask you, Buddy Blue," the same damn rhyme. Next to the trail, I noticed small, bright stalks reaching out of the soil. They looked freshly planted. I could guess what kind of plant they were, even though they hadn't bloomed yet. "Won't you be a sunflower too?" I stepped into the clearing. I could barely see them all with that tiny cone of light. There were hundreds of them, spread out in a circle. In the middle was Julie, reciting her rhyme over and over. She'd taken off her clothes, and I could see mosquitoes swarming her. It didn't seem to bother her. The melody in her song was gone, turned to a mantra. She was standing with her back towards me, holding her hands in front of her like a cup. She suddenly made a harsh coughing sound and bent forward. I took a few steps and stopped. Every single sunflower turned towards me, blue leaves vibrating like rattlesnakes. Julie turned around. Sunflower seeds were dripping from her mouth. In her cupped hands, she held the same kind of foul-smelling tar dirt that I'd found in the wastebasket. Her eyes were bright blue. Her teeth were stained black. "You're my friend, I'll sing your tune." Sunflower seeds kept falling from the edge of her mouth. She kept coughing almost choking. She was constantly on the edge of inhaling the seeds into her lungs. Her singing voice was broken and struggling. Still, she smiled. The same smile that could get me to do anything. A setting sun to rising moon. The flowers turned back towards her, vibrating. Tiny leaves clapping in appreciation. I didn't know what to do. I was horrified. I was angry. I was desperate. I froze. Julie walked up to me, holding a large seed between her lips. She took my hands and leaned forward to kiss me. I've never smelled anything so putrid in my life. I think that's what snapped me out of it. It was the only time I've refused a kiss from her. I'm not proud of what happened next, but I didn't have a choice. I grabbed Julie and threw her over my shoulder. She protested wildly, scratching and beating me. She had to stop over and over to throw up more seeds and dirt. I just ignored the wounds on my neck and scalp and kept carrying her. I'd locked her in the back seat of the car and turned on the child locks. As I shut the doors, she was hysterical, screaming and flailing in the back seat like a possessed toddler. I got a jerrycan for my car. It was half full. That was enough. I stopped smoking the day we moved into our new apartment, but I still had my lighter. When I stepped back out into that clearing, I could hear something moving. I ignored it. I dumped every drop of gasoline that I had and just set the whole field on fire. I left the lighter behind. As I stepped away, I could hear things popping in the grass. Blue leaves crinkling to ash, and somewhere there were tiny screams. Tiny, bright screams. Something was burned alive in that field, and I don't want to think about what it might have been. It sounded human. Wrong, but human. Julie recovered in a couple of days. The doctors figured she'd been eating seeds from the sunflower and that it had contained some kind of poison. The doctor couldn't find anything abnormal about her blood levels, and after a couple of days of rest, she was back to her old self again. Her eyes were back to their ordinary brown, and her smile was as genuine as ever. She was so sorry for all the trouble she caused, and she had a hard time remembering what had happened. To her, it was all a bad dream. We've since gotten pregnant. Over the months, we've baby-proofed the apartment, but we're already looking to move to a house. Julie got back to her job as a temp, and she might be looking at an extension at the end of the school year. She's quite popular. We're thinking about the name Danny with a Y for a boy, or Danny with an I for a girl. We're not sure yet. There's only one thing that still worries me. The ultrasounds. Julie have been taking them while I'm at work, but she's shown me every single image. They look perfectly fine, but on the last one, there was something that didn't add up. In the corner of the picture, the date was set to 5 years ago. I'm suspecting she's not showing me the actual ultrasounds, or that she hasn't taken them. I don't know what she could be hiding. And sometimes, at night, I hear her humming. The same damn tune. You're my friend, I'll sing your tune. A setting sun to rising moon. I ask you, Buddy Blue, won't you be a sunflower too?
Hello and welcome to Daytime, your place for scary stories, straight from the horror forums of Reddit. Make sure to like and subscribe for more horror tales of things that go bumping the night. On tonight's episode, a man's hired by a friend to work for a startup discovers that the office is hiding a dark secret. So, have you ever struggled with addiction? Because this is how we became addicted to our office.
A few years ago, I got back in touch with an old friend of mine. Phil had always been a bit of a visionary. He could make anything sound convincing, so when he suggested I move down to Oklahoma City to work with him at his startup, there was no way I'd say no. The business plan seemed solid, and he'd already laid the groundwork. The first 3 employees had been Phil himself, his college roommate Lance, and this guy named Milan, who they'd flown in from Slovenia, an actual computer wizard. I was among the second generation of hires, along with 6 others. He had this idea of an event planning business centered around corporate culture, company outings, conventions, events, and all comforts in between. Phil knew there was enough demand for someone to deal with that kind of stuff at several large firms. I was brought on as a front-end developer. Basically, I make sure you can click things. I connect the back-end systems to an easily navigated front and present it in an inviting way. I've got a background in user experience, HCI, and various evaluation processes. Focus groups, cognitive walkthroughs, user cases, personas. That's my jam. I make clever solutions, test them, and measure results. You could say I Fab 5 whatever system we need to make interactive. So that's how I got involved. By the time I got there, they'd changed the company name to Marion and Landing Corporate Events. Apparently, having a double name tested well with investors. My first day was pretty much everyone's first day. M&L had relocated to a large office space, a company incubator a few blocks from downtown OKC. Phil made a big deal of it with ribbon cutting and handing out our pass cards in a sort of offbeat ceremony. We all got our desk spaces assigned. There was cake, and all 10 of us had to take turns introducing ourselves. The place had been fixed up a bit, but I'm pretty sure the wall-to-wall carpet was at least from the late 80s. We spent most of that day just setting up our workspace, installing software, setting up the infrastructure, reviewing our workplace routines. I spent the day being ping-pong between Phil, talking short-term gain, and Lance, talking big futures, scalability. It worried me in a way. I could tell these two would have trouble cooperating in the long term. The first time I got to talk to Milan, we were in the conference room, grabbing a second piece of cake. I found him staring at something in the corner and walked up to see what it was. Someone had given us a flower as part of our welcome package. There was a little gift basket and a nice little yellow flower pot. It had a little welcome sign and everything. The flower itself was a bit weird, though. Some kind of sunflower, but smaller and with a blue tint. Had a strange smell to it. A present from the previous tenants, perhaps, or the landlord. It'll be dead in a week, I sighed.
Sorry.
Milan looked at me with wide eyes as if I'd said something inappropriate. The flower? I can never keep those alive for long.
Oh.
He chuckled.
Oh, yes.
He patted me on the shoulder and gave me the widest smile. He left the conference room, only to turn in the doorway.
Dead in a week.
He chuckled.
Just can't help it.
The following days were a lot less fun. Phil was on a tight schedule. He'd promised a major investor a working prototype on a tight deadline and a first version by the end of the month. He had this big speech about responsibility and camaraderie and how we would all have to pitch in to make ends meet.
This is an adventure.
He beamed at the morning meeting.
We're going through dangerous woods, and some days we're gonna have to ditch our backpacks to get away from angry bears. We might have to trek through stinking swamps or fend off wolves with nothing but sharp sticks. I won't lie. This is gonna be tough, but I promise you that at the end of that journey, there'll be a beautiful meadow.
I listened to the best of my ability, but I couldn't ignore that our new office flower was already looking a bit beat, and it had only been a day. It was all hands on deck. I didn't have much time to think about anything outside of font choices, domain names, verification procedures, and meetings. Every goddamn day, meetings. I've worked on Scrum projects before, but this was ridiculous. Still, we did good work. We made the deadline for the working prototype. We hit a few snags, and we got some feedback that might be hard to act on, but overall, it worked out in our favor. Strangely enough, the office sunflower still hung in there. I'd completely forgotten about it. It still had the little welcome sign, and it had turned completely blue. The petals were sagging. If it wasn't dead already, it was dying. As I looked it over in the dreary conference room, Lance knocked on the door. This guy was 3 years younger than me, and about as type A as you can get. Vicious go-getter and visionary, whose family had deep enough pockets for him to afford failure. He tried to keep some sort of corpo surfer dude look, but he just seemed out of place. He walked in noticing me looking over the office flower. Without a word, he walked up to it and picked it up. A few petals tumbled to the ground.
Poor thing.
He said,
You think it'll make it?
I don't know, I shrugged. It's been indoors and unwatered for a week. It is either dead or a vampire.
I think we'll be okay.
Lance said, putting it back down.
I don't see no fangs.
As we struggled to meet deadline, after deadline, after deadline, that first week had suddenly turned into a month. Phil was sounding a bit less optimistic. Lance mostly just sat by his window, trying to figure out some impossible resource puzzle. Milan was working pretty much around the clock. I swear the guy had a sleeping bag next to his coat, and I never actually saw him leave. By the end of the month, we ended up in another meeting. This time, it wasn't quite as positive. Phil's tie was loose, and Lance was uncharacteristically quiet.
I'll just say it.
Phil sighed.
This is not sustainable.
A month in, and we were already cutting 3 people loose. On top of that, we had a new deadline. 2 weeks. That's when the first version had to be available. There was an actual gasp around the table.
A big client is ready to sign us.
Explained Phil.
Hatchet Investments. We're talking long-term contracts, but they have other options, and if we can't get this up and running by then, they're dropping us. If this company is to survive, we have to look forward. Always forward.
I was mentally checked out. The amount of work we could expect was staggering. And just thinking about the upcoming late nights drained me. I found my thoughts and eyes constantly drifting away from the charts and explanations, desperately looking for something to latch onto, like the office flower. By now, it was as dead as could be. The petals littered the floor, but the welcome sign remained. Things got ugly fast. Phil started handing out free takeout to everyone who stayed late, and we got an extra couch just for sleeping. Luckily, most of us didn't have any other arrangements. Many of us were single and childless, so there wasn't anyone relying on us being home at a certain time. Incidentally, all 3 people who had been cut loose had rich family lives. We got into this rhythm. All day, every day, all we did was work. At one point, I saw Milan washing himself with a sponge in the communal kitchen. Lance was handing out company t-shirts for those who hadn't showered. Takeout boxes were piling up. Still, we soldiered on. We trusted Phil and his vision that there'd be a green pasture past the brambles. But man, were those some deep brambles.
Hey man, are you okay?
The voice hit me out of nowhere. I snapped out of a daze and found myself looking at a man. I was standing in the hallway, holding the door open to a stranger.
I'm here for the, quality assurance position.
He said.
Is Lance in?
Yeah, sure, I said. He's around. Of course he was. We all were. I invited the young man in, but found myself confused. I was second-guessing myself. My phone had long since run out of battery, and I hadn't even considered charging it. I looked at the young man, who kept shifting his eyes at me. Excuse me, but my phone is broken. It's the 15th, right? I asked.
18.
He answered.
Surprised to see you guys working Saturdays.
So was I. I'd thought it was a Wednesday. I walked up to Phil, who was half asleep at his desk. I saw Lance invite the young man into the conference room, right across from the dead office flower. No one had had time to clean it up. I'm gonna head home, I said. Get a fresh pair, shower, have some fruit.
Yeah, you do that.
Mumbled Phil as he shifted in his seat. His face was stuck to his keyboard, leaving deep marks on his chin.
Get back soon.
Just a few hours, I yawned. I'll get the presentation done by the morning meeting.
No slacking.
None. I headed out the door, but as soon as I stepped out, I had this violent coughing attack. It felt like I'd tried to inhale a handful of needles, as tiny pricks of pain invaded my throat. I leaned against the wall, gasping for air. I don't suffer from allergies or asthma, but I can imagine this being something similar. For a moment, it just felt like I was dying. Like my body was rejecting something foreign. I scrambled back into the office as my coworkers stared daggers at me. I downed 3 glasses of tap water and hunched over the kitchen sink. The pain subsided. A brief calm settled in my chest as the sound of my heartbeat turned down from a banging assault rifle to a soft, steady drum. I figured I might as well get back to work. But it wasn't that simple. By the time I got back to my desk, I looked around. It occurred to me that pretty much no one was working anymore. Milan was half asleep on the couch, swiping on Tinder. Phil was fast asleep at his desk. My other 3 colleagues were either browsing social media or blankly staring out the window, wrapped in a blanket. At some point, we'd all just stopped. We were just living there. The young man that Lance had interviewed hurried out of the conference room. I could see Lance leaning back in his chair, taking a sitting nap. Had he fallen asleep during the interview? I hurried to catch up to the young man, waving him down by the entrance. "Excuse me," I said. "Everything okay in there?"
I'm sorry, but I can't work in this environment. That guy is clearly on drugs. Half of you seem to be having a mental breakdown, and
The young man stammered, waving his arms around.
the smell. And I'm not just talking about the pizza boxes, man. It's something in the walls. Like old bread or something. Can't you smell it?
The pizza boxes, sure, but I took a few deep breaths. No biggie. A bit dusty, but that was it. I just looked at him and shrugged.
Y'all got problems.
He said, shaking his head.
Good luck.
I got back to my desk and placed my hand on my comfortable office chair. I could just plop back down and try to get the presentation done. But had I already given up on going home? That was fast. I decided to try again. I buttoned up my jacket, took another swig of water, and walked out the door. I made it 20 steps. That sharp pain came back to my throat, spreading like a burning centipede all the way down to my diaphragm. It was this black, all-consuming pain. Blinding, violent medical condition kind of pain. I just lay there, gasping for air. I couldn't move. My eyes were watering, and I could feel tension building in my head. My chest was caving in on itself as my body turned over every nook and cranny, looking for oxygen. All I'd done was walk out the door. Now I lay dying in the corridor. My vision was just a pin, a speck of light, but gradually I could feel the coil loosening over my chest. I was being moved. An eternity later, I found myself on the sleeping couch, being gently slapped awake. Milan looked down at me, trying to force that wide smile back. It didn't work. It didn't look genuine against those sunken, exhausted eyes.
Don't push too hard.
He nodded.
Dead in a week.
Dead in a week, I agreed. He chuckled, patted me on the shoulder, and wandered off. I stayed there, trying to figure out what was happening. Once the chest pain subsided and my throat was cleared, I decided to test this further. So, it turns out, I physically couldn't leave the office. It wasn't a matter of distance, but time. The longer I was out of the office, the worse I got. Even a single step outside the door and I began feeling symptoms of asphyxiation. But it seemed like I was the only one who cared. Everyone else was either asleep or just lounging. I tried talking to Milan again, but he didn't seem to understand. I tried waking Phil, but he just dismissed me. Lance was leaning back in his chair, mouth wide open and snoring loudly in the conference room. Still, I had to try something. The conference room was my best bet. "Excuse me," as I said, sitting down across from Lance. "I need to talk to you." His head came up with a yawn. He cleared his eyes, scratched his stubble, and looked at me with an honest confusion. "There's something wrong here," I said. We're sick."
Sure, yeah.
Lance leaned over into the corner of the room and picked up the yellow flower pot. The wilted sunflower barely held on. "We gotta call someone. Poison control or someone."
All right, I hear you.
He snapped the wilted flower in half and put it into his mouth. Still maintaining eye contact, he stared me down, chewing. I didn't know what to say. "Lance, you're eating it," I said. "You're eating the flower."
Yeah,
He nodded.
I guess.
He scooped up some wilted petals along with a handful of dirt, slowly consuming it like it was nothing. Little specks of dirt fell from the corner of his mouth as dry and crunchy as sand. What are you doing?" "What?" Still maintaining eye contact. Nothing about what he did seemed to register as something wrong. If anything, I was the one being odd. I looked out at the others, but no one seemed to care. Milan just walked by, smiling and nodding. "Lance, you gotta..." I leaned forward to take the flower pot away from him, accidentally tearing off the little welcome sign. Lance's demeanor shifted in an instant. Like a wild animal stepping into a fox trap. He pulled the pot back, put it on the file cabinet, and kicked the table over. He assumed this aggressive stance, positioning himself between me and the door. Not a soul reacted. "What the fuck are you doing?" I yelled. Is anyone seeing this?"
What was it you wanted to discuss?
He asked in a neutral, monotone voice.
You got the presentation ready?
I was caught off guard as he suddenly leapt towards me, only to trip on the flipped table. I ran across the room, accidentally knocking over the file cabinet. The yellow flower pot tumbled to the floor as I realized there really was a smell. There was a big green spot of mold behind the file cabinet, reaching into the floor, covered by the old 80s carpet. It had made a soft spot there, where you could physically press your foot down at least half an inch. I looked up, only to see all my coworkers on their feet staring at me. I could even see Phil back on his feet, eyes wide open but head slouched against his shoulder. He was fast asleep, but his body was still standing up. Lance was circling me like a shark. I carefully stepped over the file cabinet.
If there was nothing else, you ought to get back to work.
Lance said.
Get cracking on that presentation.
Milan was lying on the sleeping couch, staring at me, eyes black like a hungry predator. Sorry, I just wanted to check in, I said. Never mind me.
No worries.
Lance leapt over the table and carefully picked up the yellow flower pot. Again, he scooped some dirt up, shoveling it into his mouth.
You're doing great.
He coughed in between bites.
Keep up the good work.
I walked out into our communal workspace, feeling the stares coming at me from every direction. It was as if they didn't know what they were really doing. If one were to close their eyes and listen, it'd just sound like an office. But looking at them, it was a nightmare. Now that I knew what to look for, I could see it everywhere. Pieces of mold reaching into the furniture. The chairs, the tables, the desks. Hell, even the hat rack by the entrance. Now that I knew about it, I could definitely smell it. It had a medicinal sourness to it, like something chemical and nauseating. With every step I took, I could feel it puffing up from the carpet. How hadn't we noticed it? Had we grown so dependent on it, so gradually? I couldn't charge my phone, so I tried to go online. Only now did I realize that our internet connection had died. We could fiddle around on our computers all day, but we weren't actually connected to anything. Two of the others were just clicking away, but their screens had long since turned off. Phil seemed to be writing a document, but it was all just jumbled nonsense. That got me thinking. Milan had been swiping on Tinder. Did he have a connection? I walked over to him, only to see him swiping his fingers against a blank screen. He looked up at me with tired eyes, giving me a forced smile.
Dead in a week.
He nodded.
Yes?
Yes, Milan, in a week. In that environment, it is hard to stay sane. I lost track of time over and over again. There were no deadlines to meet, no meetings, no phone calls. We all just assumed we were constantly in between work. At one point, as I headed to the bathroom, I realized it had been 2 days since the young man knocked on our door. All we did was drink water and hallucinate. At one point, I woke up, thinking everything was fine. It took a whiff of that mold to come crashing back to reality. Phil had started eating the cardboard from the old pizza boxes. Milan was obsessively drinking water like his life depended on it. I hadn't even seen Lance in a couple of days. Our other coworkers were either making out like it was the end of the world or squirming against the carpet like dogs rubbing their backs. With what little clarity I had, I tried to do something. I tried putting up a help sign in the window, but I couldn't find a working pen. Someone had used most of our markers to draw on the bathroom walls. I tried throwing a monitor out the window, but the others just grabbed me and pulled me down to the floor, and I blacked out from the mold smell. The windows were shut, but even if they weren't, there was no way I'd survive a 3-story fall into solid asphalt. Every deadline had come and gone. We were barely even speaking. We just sort of grunted, surviving like locusts. One guy in the corner was severely ill. He could barely breathe. Phil was picking insects out of the carpet like a chimpanzee. Milan was eating his own hair. And still, Lance was nowhere to be seen. That morning, as I wandered about in a daze, I decided to try. That was literally my entire thought. To try. I opened the broom closet only to find Lance. He had curled up in a fetal position and died. There were little sunflower sprouts growing out of his ears, nails, and face. His skin was crackling like dry dirt, and little black insects crawled across his empty white eyes. He'd been dead for a while. A long while. Maybe a week. I grabbed a hammer. I had to try. I walked out of the kitchen and lumbered towards the front door. As soon as I got near it, the others got up. They would try to stop me. Milan, still trying to smile, came up to me. I had to remember to try. Just try. I smacked him across the cheek with my hammer, and he collapsed on the floor. The others started running. Phil lurched forward like a primate, grunting and yelling. The other two followed suit, brandishing keyboards like clubs. I opened the front door and felt that sharp pain immediately. It was like willingly stepping into a furnace. Try, try, try. I felt hands grabbing at me, desperately trying to pull me back. I kept hitting them over and over, breaking fingers, hands, elbows, noses.
Don't be late.
Mumbled Phil.
The review. You're on for 9 o'clock. On your desk in an hour.
And then Milan looked up at me from the floor, his forced smile missing a tooth.
Dead. In a week.
Finally, as my crusty M&L Company t-shirt failed me, I stumbled into the hallway. I just ran. I ran forward and they refused to follow. Like animals recoiling from flame, they retreated. I heard their screams as my deteriorating body forced its way down the hallway, past the company logo, past the emergency exit plan, past the fire extinguisher. There was no air anymore, just crippling pain. My left leg gave out, but I kept hobbling forward, leaning against the wall. I felt the cool concrete against my skin, soothing the burning pain inside. As I rounded the corner, I collapsed, tumbling down the stairs. Something snapped in my shoulder and my foot was turned the wrong way. I was stuck, like a rock on the ocean floor. The last thing I saw before my vision faded was someone dressed in green. And the last thing I heard was a gasp. And then nothing. I was rescued by a cleaning lady doing her rounds. I was clinically dead for about 20 seconds. But they brought me back and put me on a ventilator. They described it as a severe anaphylactic shock. Could have put me in a coma. I saw it on the news. Some of it. The version they wanted us to see. They called it severe carbon poisoning because of a failed ventilation inspection. I watched the news segment where they rolled a black body bag out. I could see it was contorted. There were interviews with the building owner, various health inspectors, and even a few political figures. Our main investor, the Hatchet Group, was appalled. They had been paying us as part of a contract to develop our platform, but agreed that they'd noticed complications. Still, I figured it was strange that they didn't mention not sending a single person to inspect us or hold a meeting. Officially, there'd been a misunderstanding with the independent contractor who was supposed to do an inspection before we moved in. They had already gone bankrupt, so there was no accountability. Administrative oversight, at worst. About a month later, the entire building was scheduled for demolition. Not a single word of mold or fungus. Phil ended up with a serious tracheal infection that cost him his voice. Milan had some sort of infected stomach ulcer and had to be put on an IV. Last thing I heard of him was that he was in a wheelchair. Still coding, though. The other two? They seemingly disappeared off the face of the earth. They were kept out of the papers and were only briefly seen on the news segment. I think one of them moved to Minnesota. The other, I don't know. This was a few years ago, and I've only recently started to remember things more clearly. It's like a fog slowly lifting from my mind. I moved back to my hometown of Juniper to get away from all this. Got a job as a part-time teacher. I want this as a sort of record if something were to happen to me. Because I recently found a strange blue plant growing in my backyard, and I have this dreadful feeling in the pit of my stomach that I might be dead in a week.